Good to see you. Two significant votes are about to get underway at the United Nations in New York. The first could see significant sanctions placed back on Iran. The second will impact the General Assembly work next week. Well, the Security Council is set to vote on blocking the sanctions snapback on Iran. This resolution is expected to fail and trigger the reimposition of sanctions on Tehran that were in place between 2006 and 2010. The second is a vote by the General Assembly on whether to allow Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas's address next week at high-level meetings at the UN. He has not been given a US visa to attend. Our diplomatic editor, James Bays, is primed to talk about all of this. He's live for us at the United Nations. James, give us an outline, firstly, of the mechanism, this so-called snapback. It may sound complicated, it may sound convoluted, but can you explain what it is, how it came into being, and why it's so important right now?
Well, it's an unusual way for the UN and the Security Council to work, specifically designed as part of that nuclear deal in 2015. But the essence of it is it's the nuclear option of the nuclear deal. If Iran does not comply, then all of the sanctions snap back into place, all of the international sanctions that were in place before 2015. And of course, Iran is already suffering from very crippling US and other Western sanctions. So if all the international sanctions imposed by the UN were to return, that would be something very bad for Iran. The snapback was triggered by the European nations, 28th of August, in this letter. Here's the signature of the three European ministers. And part of this procedure, which was laid out in a resolution days after the deal, was that there had to be a vote. The vote is going to be brought by the current president of the Security Council. That was required in the resolution that was passed at the time, South Korea. And South Korea is going to put that vote in the next few minutes. Now, if that vote were to pass, then snapback doesn't happen. Snapback is stopped. The snapback procedure triggered by those three countries is stopped. But if the vote does not pass, then the snapback deadline continues. The clock continues ticking until next Saturday, the end of next Saturday, New York time, when all those sanctions come back into place. Now, I've been speaking to diplomats walking into this room. You can see the UN Security Council in the last few minutes, and all are telling me they think that this vote will not pass and the snapback timeline till next Saturday will continue. The French ambassador, Jérôme Bonafort, told me, do you have any doubt to me when I said was that they're going to get 9 votes? He seems pretty certain. The meeting's now been called to order by the president, which is South Korea of this month. Not clear if we'll get anyone speaking before the vote, Neve, or whether they'll go straight to the vote in the next few moments.
As we were saying, James, we are focused on another issue there, the United Nations, specifically the UN General Assembly, another vote on whether Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas will be able to, in some shape or form, speak at the UN General Assembly.
Вынуждены взять слово по порядку ведения заседания.
Take the floor on the point of order because we see no legal or political or procedural reasons for any kind of steps in development of the European claims that the snapback mechanism needs to come in. And this includes the voting on the draft resolution, which was tabled by the South Korean presidency. We have, on many an occasion and various fora, have provided an explanation that there are no rights to launch what exists under operative paragraph 11 in Resolution 2020-31, the mechanism there, that the European participants of JCPOA have no rights to do that. The UK, France and Germany are themselves chronic violators of Security Council Resolution 2231 and of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, including through introducing illegal unilateral sanctions against Iran in a replacement of those which expired on the restrictions plan. These countries also grossly violated the procedure for the consideration of disputed situations we have under JCPOA. In particular, they did not launch, according to the procedure we have on the Vienna platform, the mechanism for the dispute settlements. And I would like to recall here that Resolution 2231 is an integral document, and it does not allow for a discrepancy between that mechanism and the JCPOA, which has always been and remains its integral part. Attempts on the part of the European countries to present the situation as though they have the right to activate the punitive positions of the resolutions while themselves do not fulfilling their own obligations are disingenuous and politically and legally cannot hold water. And that is why we do not acknowledge the complaint presented by Berlin, London, Paris, a complaint into the Council under the meaning of the Resolution 2231. In this regard, therefore, we see no need for the current presidency to undertake any steps here, including the step to introduce a resolution. We are also puzzled by the fact that it was so speedily presented by the South Korean presidency, despite the fact that we have more than a week before the 30 days elapse. And we regret the fact that the Republic of Korea decided to play along with Western destructive approaches, and this is at the expense of their own duties to be an impartial president. Overall, what is happening today gives us the feeling that we're witnessing a clumsy performance.
All right, well, we came abruptly away from James Bayes to take us to the UN Security Council there to listen in to the Russian delegate, Vasily Nebenzia, who has been very, very critical about his European partners. James, before we continue talking about the snapback, before we cut away from you, we were talking about that other issue that's unfolding at the UN General Assembly, that vote on whether to allow Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to speak. Can you remind us what's happened here and what's behind this particular vote?
Well, basically, he has not been allowed, and some of his top officials have not been allowed to come to New York when all the other world leaders are here next week. He hasn't got a visa. This is pretty unprecedented for the Palestinians. They come every single year. The US in the past has put restrictions on other delegations. But most countries here at the UN believe that's a breach of the agreement between the UN and the US, the host country agreement, the agreement for the UN to be based here in New York. So what's going to happen in the General Assembly, and that proceedings happening right now. In fact, the United States are explaining their position right now in the General Assembly, is that they are going to have a vote. Palestine's put forward a resolution which would allow President Abbas, it will condemn the fact that he's not been allowed to come here, and will allow him to speak by video to the UN General Assembly next week, also to a big gathering on Palestine, at which we expect some Western countries to recognise the Palestinian state. That vote, I'm told by most diplomats, going to go in favour of Palestine, and President Abbas will get that permission, we think, to speak by video link. That vote, I would expect to come in the next few minutes.
James, let's listen in to the US delegate there in the UN General Assembly talking about all of this.
ICJ and its efforts to bypass negotiations to secure the unilateral recognition of a conjectural Palestinian state. Both steps materially contributed to Hamas's refusal to release hostages and to the breakdown of the Gaza ceasefire talks. The United States remains open to re-engagement that is consistent with our laws, should the PLO and the Palestinian Authority meet their obligations and demonstrably take concrete steps to return to a constructive path of compromise and peaceful coexistence with Israel. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States. We have heard the last speaker in explanation of vote before vote. The Assembly will now take a decision on a draft resolution A/80/L2/revision 1, entitled Participation by the State of Palestine during the 80th session. A vote is requested. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft resolution A80/L2/revision 1, please signify. Those against? Abstentions?
The Assembly is now voting on draft resolution A/80/L2/revision 1 entitled Participation by the State of Palestine during the 80th session. Will all delegations confirm that the votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 145. Against,
All right, you're
5.
watching Al Jazeera. Let's explain exactly what's been going on there at the UN General Assembly. Annalena Baerbock, former German foreign minister there, now in a new role, presiding over proceedings. James Bays, our diplomatic editor, is standing by. We've seen some results coming in, James. 145 in favour of this resolution, 5 against, 6 abstentions. Remind us of exactly what the delegates there were voting on.
Well, President Abbas and his key officials are not currently able to come to New York for the high-level week of the UN General Assembly. The US has denied them visas. They now have a situation where President Abbas has been given extraordinary permission to speak to the UN delegates next week by video. That was allowed during COVID, but it had to be allowed by a vote. And to allow it again on this occasion, they have had a vote to allow it. And overwhelming, 145 countries in favour, 5 against, 6 abstentions. And also worth telling you, there's condemnation of the US in that resolution, in the draft of that resolution that was passed. I have the resolution in front of me here that's just been passed by the UN General Assembly, and expresses concern regarding situations in which representatives are not allowed, are prevented from participating in the UN General Assembly. So that is what's going on in the General Assembly, pretty much concluded there. But of course, we've got 2 things happening at the same time here, Niamh, and
James,
one vote taking place, one very close to happening in the Security Council.
James, talking about 2 things happening at the same time. Let's go back to the UN Security Council, where the French delegate there is speaking about the snapback mechanism, that's possible vote to prevent the return of European sanctions on Iran.
Its nuclear program. This escalation, documented by successive reports of the IAEA, has led Iran to exceed one by one all of the limits that were established in the 2015 agreement. Iran has therefore accumulated a stock of enriched uranium 40 times higher than the 300-kilo limit that was contained in the 2015 agreement. More than 450 kilos at 60%, over 60%, whereas the 2015 agreement gave an enrichment limit of 3.76%. 40 times higher. Once again, the limit of enrichment has been exceeded over 60%. The 450 kilos, if it reached military enrichment levels, would make it possible to produce 10 nuclear warheads. The IAEA has underscored in its report that Iran is the only state that does not have a nuclear weapon to have enriched to these kinds of levels. These kinds of activities have no credible justification if it were to be part of a civil program. Once again, it's the IAEA saying that as an independent professional body. Iran has also, for several years now, imposed restrictions on the IAEA verification mechanisms. And the agency has indicated that it has now lost continuity of knowledge with regard to huge aspects of the Iranian nuclear program. Since then, France and our E3 colleagues have applied the JCPOA in good faith with regard to all chapters of the agreement, and we have deployed constant efforts to arrive at a diplomatic solution. In January 2023, we activated the dispute mechanism that is contained in the agreement to try to address the non-respect by Iran of its obligations. In 2021 and 2022, we concluded those efforts. We led intensive negotiations then with a view to bringing Iran round to respecting its arrangements. Two viable proposals were put forward by the JCPOA coordinator in 2022, March and April of that year, and each time Iran refused these offers. Since September 2024, France and our E3 partners have clearly signified to Iran our determination to launch the snapback mechanism before the expiry next October of the mechanism, taking into account the non-proliferation regime and our interests. It's clear that the escalation is continuing with the Iranian nuclear program. It's threatening regional
You're listening to Jérôme Bonnefoy, who's the French ambassador to the United Nations there, speaking at the UN Security Council. James Bayes, our diplomatic editor, is listening into all of that alongside me. James, so we don't get lost in the details here, remind us of why European partners decided to trigger this snapback mechanism. What is it that they believe that the Iranians were doing or not doing that now leads us into this situation where this vote is taking place?
Well, they believe there were a number of violations, but the basic one was that Iran was enriching uranium to a much higher level than it should have done under the 2015 deal, very, very close to weapons grade. And that's why they decided to push the snapback. But of course, I don't think it was entirely the three European nations that took this decision, the UK, France and Germany. I think they were getting a bit of help from a backseat driver. The US couldn't trigger snapback because it had pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal. That's something that President Trump did in his first term. But the US, I think, also wanted to put pressure on Iran. And that's why this 30-day mechanism was triggered. Now, Ambassador Bonnefoy, who is speaking now, I spoke to him on the way into the chamber. He made it clear to me, he said, do you have any doubt about the outcome? And that was after I said to him, is it right that this vote that we're going to see in a few moments is not going to pass, which means the snapback with a 1 week, just over 1 week left to the snapping back of all the sanctions that were in place before 2015. Do you have any doubt that's going to happen? He seems to not have any doubt. The same from the British ambassador, Barbara Woodward, who was speaking in the Security Council a short time ago. I asked her, because of course France and the UK, if they don't get the votes, will be obliged to use their veto, and France and the UK have not used their veto in the Security Council, and they're rather proud of it, since 1989. And she said it didn't think it would be a UK veto today. She thought the resolution wouldn't get the votes, but she was keen to say that was not the end of diplomacy, and she thought it was possible, and from the UK's point of view, desirable that next week, when all the leaders are here in town, that there could be negotiations again with Iran and the European nations to try and avoid snapback, to try and get concessions from Iran that would mean that the Security Council would then come up with another resolution, and this time it would pass, unlike this one that's about to be voted on, which we think will not pass. And just to add to that as well, I spoke on the way in to Ambassador Vasily Nebenzia. Now, you saw at the start of this meeting, he made a point of order. He doesn't think the Europeans have, under the deal, the right to declare snapback. Despite that, he said that the original configuration, which was the so-called P5+1, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council plus Germany, negotiating with Iran. That's what came up with the nuclear deal back in 2015. He was saying Russia favours that configuration, coming back together during high-level week to negotiate with Iran to try and avoid snapback. What I think we're looking at with the deadline for those sanctions snapping back into place at the end of Saturday next week, New York time, I think we're looking at high-level, high-stakes diplomacy. Just while all the world leaders are converging here in New York, this, in addition to the war in Gaza and the war in Ukraine, I think is going to become one of the centerpieces of this week's next week's UN General Assembly taking place in New York.
All right, James. So just to be clear, there is some wiggle room essentially between this vote and when the snapback comes into force. So reaffirming sanctions on Iran. During that time, you're saying we may well see very high level, high stakes diplomacy to try and avoid it. But what do you think Iran is fearing the most here? Remind us of what is in those sanctions. What's at stake when it comes for what's included in this snapback mechanism itself?
Well, I mean, this is the final stage of the snapback process and mechanism that we're seeing or about to see in this vote, which we're expecting to come in the next few moments. And one senior diplomat told me this was the final pressure point that they have on Iran if this resolution does not pass in just a few moments. What it would eventually mean is that all the previous sanctions on Iran, all the international sanctions would come back into place. I think we're about to get the vote. Now let's listen to the President of the Security Council.
2025/561. Please raise their hand. Those against? Abstentions? The result of the voting is as follows. 4 votes in favor, 9 votes against, 2 abstentions. The draft resolution has not been adopted, having failed to obtain the required number of votes. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I also welcome the participation of the Iranian permanent representative in this meeting. Today's resolution fulfills a key step of the snapback process set out in Security Council Resolution 2231. President, the United Kingdom is committed to pursuing a diplomatic solution to ensure that Iran shall never seek, acquire or develop a nuclear weapon. That is why on the 28th of August, the United Kingdom, France and Germany notified this Council of Iran's clear and deliberate non-compliance with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. We have urged Iran to address international concerns regarding its nuclear program, which the International Atomic Energy Agency has been unable to confirm is exclusively peaceful. Iran's nuclear escalation has been detailed in more than 60 reports by the IAEA over 6 years. It includes the accumulation of a high-enriched uranium stockpile, which lacks any credible civilian justification and is unprecedented for a state without a nuclear weapons program. President, the United Kingdom voted no on today's resolution because, if it were adopted, it would have permanently terminated 6 Council resolutions on Iran's nuclear program, removing this important issue from the Council's agenda, despite Iran's JCPOA non-compliance and Iran's continuing failure to implement its legal obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. President, in good faith, we offered Iran an opportunity to extend the provisions of Resolution 2231 if Iran resumed full cooperation with the IAEA in line with its legal obligations, addressed concerns regarding its high-enriched uranium stockpile, and re-engaged seriously in negotiations. These steps are achievable for Iran. They're also justified and proportionate. They would give reassurance to this Council that a full diplomatic deal would follow. But without these most basic conditions being met, there is no clear path to a swift diplomatic solution. We regret that Iran has so far failed to take these steps, and we urge them to act now. President, the United Kingdom remains committed to a diplomatic solution. We are ready for further engagements diplomatically in the next week and beyond to seek to resolve differences. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also welcome permanent representative of Iran to the chamber. I wish to begin by expressing my appreciation to you for your leadership.
Okay, we have all eyes trained on the UN Security Council. There were crucial vote has just taken place. What has happened is that a resolution that would have blocked the so-called snapback from being reintroduced, imposing sanctions, European sanctions on Iran because of the belief that it was in violation of a treaty regarding its nuclear programme, has been voted down. 4 in favour of that resolution, 9 against, 2 abstentions. We just heard from Barbara Woodward, the British ambassador to the United Nations, reminding us, and James Bays has been listening into all of that as well, reminding us, James, of what was behind this decision to trigger this in the first place, a firm belief that the Iranians were not being honest, not being open about their nuclear ambitions.
Yes, that's right, and that's why on the 28th of August, 3 nations, the 3 European signatories to the nuclear deal, decided to trigger this mechanism, a 30-day process. But it was interesting there that she made it clear, Barbara Woodward, the outgoing UK ambassador to the United Nations, that there is, in view of those 3 countries, a way for Iran still to stop the snapback. Now, I mean, I think Iran will question some of these conditions that are being put on Iran, but the conditions are this: full cooperation with the IAEA, that's the UN's nuclear watchdog, full accountability for the highly enriched uranium. You remember Iran was producing uranium at nearly weapons grade before that attack that was carried out first by Israel and then by the United States, and they want to know whether Iran removed some of that highly enriched uranium and put it in some sort of secret place. And then re-engagement fully in negotiations. Now, on those 3 things, Iran is likely to say that it did a deal with the IAEA just a few days ago in Cairo, so it is cooperating. It's likely to say the highly enriched uranium, it's said this in the past, is buried, because of the bombardment by the US, so it doesn't have access to it. And I think that's going to be the position. And with regard to re-engagement of talks, remember, of course, that Iran was in the process of having the talks with the United States, even had another meeting that was set when the Israeli bombardment of Iran started. And, of course, for talks to take place, re-engaging talks, you actually need Iran and the US to agree to those talks. So still plenty to discuss with these nations, and I think this high-stakes diplomacy is going to go high level as well, because of course all world leaders are in New York next week for the UN General Assembly, and I think now we have a timeline with, in addition to all the other business that's going on, we're going to have nuclear negotiations going on in the sidelines, possibly involving the three European parties to the nuclear deal, the UK, France and Germany, with Iran, but possibly also all the other participants of the original deal. That's certainly what the Russians want. They want the Chinese, the Russians and even the US, the so-called P5+1, the five permanent members of the Security Council and Germany, to be involved in negotiations. I think we're going to be following this very, very closely in the coming days. And a reminder, Niamh, the final deadline, because this is an important moment here, this, as one diplomat said to me, is the final pressure point on Iran, but the final deadline is New York time, the end of the 27th, so 11:59 on the 27th, which is Saturday.
All right, James, many thanks for that. Just to remind us what we are tuned into, all eyes on the UN Security Council chamber, where there has been an important vote on the resolution there on whether or not to prevent the initiation of the so-called snapback mechanism, which basically triggers sanctions on Iran. It was always part of the framework of the so-called JCPOA agreement around Iran's nuclear program.